What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads, presented by DodgerBlue.com, part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. My name is Jeff Spiegel, joined today by our prospect expert, Justin Lorber, also our MLB Draft guy, Justin, nearing the halfway point. I imagine maybe the draft has been a helpful thing to take your mind off of what the Dodgers are actually doing on the field.
Don't even know what they're doing. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, we're trying to ignore it. But Justin is here to talk about the MLB Draft. Of course, a few years ago, they made the transition to move the draft to the All-Star break-ish weekend. So July 9th through the 11th is the MLB Draft. And Justin is here to kind of walk us through, catch us up. If you're like me, you're so focused on the regular season of Major League Baseball that you don't necessarily have a ton of time to dig into prospects and that kind of thing. Not to mention the MLB Draft is an absolute free-for-all with high schoolers and junior college guys and all sorts of stuff. So, Justin, I'll start with just a big picture question. What's the headline of the 2023 draft? What's the biggest theme, biggest thing to know as we approach the draft just a few days away?
So the biggest thing to know, and I think if you know anything about this year's draft, it's probably this. It's the two LSU guys, Dylan Cruz, who's an outfielder, and Paul Steens, who's a pitcher, who are potentially poised to go 1 and 2 overall. I think they'd be the first team duo to go back-to-back 1 and 2 in the same draft. So those two are probably the biggest storyline of the draft. You know, at the top of the draft, if you look at a lot of different rankings, for the most part, there's close to a consensus top 5, and it's Cruz, Steens, Florida outfielder Wyatt Langford, and then 2 high school outfielders, Max Clark and Walter Jenkins. But with the MLB Draft, no guarantee that just because those are the best 5 players, even if every team agreed those were the best 5 players, that those guys would go 1 through 5.
I saw Cruz and Skeens kind of referred to not just as the top prospects in this draft, but potentially like a couple of the best prospects we've seen in the last decade. I think I was Kylie McDaniel, I believe, of ESPN, who said Skeens was the best pitching prospect dating back to like Garrett Cole, and that Cruz was potentially the best hitting prospect we've seen in, like I said, nearly a decade. Do you kind of, in your research and your digging, do you agree with that assessment?
I'm not, so I don't have the kind of mental model to compare those guys to maybe like guys 10 years ago, but this is a good draft. These are 2 legitimate guys who could go 1-1. I think there's other guys, the other 3 who I just mentioned as part of this near consensus top 5, who also have a very compelling case to go 1-1 and would in most draft classes. So this is a good draft, I think, to be picking in the top 5 or near the top 5 if you can get one of those guys to fall a little bit later. And a couple of very deserving number 1 overall pick candidates.
Last thing, and I find this interesting just because I like drama. There are reports that Cruz does not want to get picked first overall because he does not want to go to the Pittsburgh Pirates. Most people that I was reading kind of think like, look, if the Pirates draft him, he's going to sign there. There's not really much. He's not going to wait a year just to avoid that. Do you believe that sort of the speculation, or do you think it's all just posturing and that at the end of the day, if Cruz goes 1-1, he's actually going to sign there?
The latter. I think it's posturing. Specifically, I think it's going to be about money. Okay. The Pirates, when they had the number 1 overall pick 2 years ago, they took Henry Davis out of Louisville, who was not the kind of top guy on most people's boards. Who knows if he was even the top guy on their board. They were able to get him to go under slot, and they saved a bunch of money at the first overall pick and use that to get some high school players later on in the draft, pay them some big bonuses they wouldn't have been able to get with maybe Marcelo Meyer or Jordan Lawler, who were kind of the 2 top-ish guys of that class. So it could be a similar thing. You know, they could identify a couple of high school players, you know, in 2nd, 3rd, 4th round range and try to get some of, or more than they could, if they didn't go, if they took Cruz. Cruz is going to cost a lot of money. He's going to go number 1 or number 2. I think it's hard to see a scenario where he doesn't do that. And it's really just, you know, do the Pirates want to take someone who's going to take less money and then they can redistribute that elsewhere in the draft, or do they want to take who they might think is the best player? And also there's no guarantee that's Cruz either.
Yeah. One last question before we get to the Dodgers picking at number 36, and this is helpful for the Dodgers. Once we get past those top 5 consensus, is this believed to be a deep class? Is this a pitching heavy class? Is this a high school heavy class? What's kind of like outside of those top 5, what's sort of the storyline or the overall sense that scouts and experts have about this draft?
From everything I've read, this is a good draft. I think if there's an area where it's weak, it's probably the high school pitching class. Noble Meyer is considered the top pitcher, probably not top 5, but maybe top 10, top 15 arm. And then there's some college pitching toward the top. Paul Steens, obviously, and Rhett Lauder from Wake Forest, Chase Dollander from Tennessee, Hurston Walderup from Florida. A lot of ACC and SEC arms, as usual. But after that, I think the college pitching class falls off a little bit as well. So by the time you get toward where the Dodgers are picking, that 30 to 40 range, the compensation round after the first round, which is where their first round pick is, because it dropped 10 spots due to them going over the luxury tax threshold that caused that. I think you're looking at a lot of bats there, both college and high school. This class is very strong on high school hitters. I think throughout the first few rounds, there are a lot of really talented guys deserving of a big bonus and, a chance to jump straight to a major league organization.
Well, you mentioned it. Dodgers picking at 36. That's 10 spots lower than expected because of the competitive balance threshold that they surpassed. So they dropped 10 spots to number 36. It was interesting, Justin, as I did a little bit of research here, that ESPN, Baseball America, and MLB Pipeline all have the same player mocked to the Dodgers at number 36. That's a high schooler outfielder named Johnny Farmello. Is that, like, sometimes when guys get linked like that, it's because, hey, everybody agrees this is the type of player the Dodgers like. Other times it's because in the MLB draft, there's actual conversations and relationships and reports of, hey, these two have been linked. If he gets there, they might already have an agreement, yada, yada, yada. With Farmello, which do you tend to believe? Is it, oh, this is the type of player the Dodgers like, or, hey, there's some real rumblings that the Dodgers and Farmello have had conversations?
I haven't seen any of the latter, so I think it's probably more the former, toolsy high school outfielder, high offensive upside. He can run, if you're talking about a ceiling on this guy, it's a 5-tool outfielder.
Wow.
So, that's the type of guy who I think would fit in the Dodgers system, bringing him in and getting him to work with some of their hitting depth guys. He is a Virginia commit, and not, this isn't universal, but historically, high school players committed to Virginia have been somewhat tougher signs compared to some other schools. So not sure whether that's a factor. I do think it's, at least somewhat relevant that, some of the quote unquote most in the know people, have linked Farmello to the Dodgers a few times. So certainly someone to watch, I think, entering draft night on, but when pick 36 comes up, if he's still on the board.
Yeah. All right. Let's walk through some of this. You can check out Justin's stuff over at futuredodgers.com. He's got a spreadsheet there, the prospect portal. One of the pages on there is his 2023 draft board. So, Justin, you've got 12-ish guys on here who are players that are not your top 12 players in the entire draft, but it's the top 12 guys almost like who are reasonable for the Dodgers to potentially expect to still be available, guys that you like. So you've got Colton Ledbetter, an outfielder from Mississippi State, is a college outfielder there. Walk me through Ledbetter and then a couple of the other players that you've got here on your board.
Yeah, so he transferred to Mississippi State from a much smaller school this year, and he just kind of set the SEC on fire. Big exit velocities, a ton of walks too. A guy who, I know what that profile sounds like, but he might be able to stay in center field, I think, for at least a decent amount of time. Maybe not whole career by the time he's 35. He's not that type of runner, but can play a competent center field. And yeah, I think the patience and the exit velocities, at least with that part of the profile, very similar to what the Dodgers did with Dalton Rushing last year. Another guy who big exit velocities and a ton of patience at the plate as well.
Well, that one's worked out okay. So we just need to find the next Dalton Rushing, Justin. It's the easiest part of this is just find the guy who's going to be a top 50 major league prospect 12 months from now and draft him at number 36, and all will be well in the world, right?
Easy enough. Yeah, sounds good.
Looking down the rest of your list, you kind of mentioned it. There are not a ton of pitchers on here. I believe you've got 3 pitchers in your top 12, but 2 of them are number 11 and 12. You do have a pitcher, though, at number 2, a righty out of Campbell University. So if Samford, the first college of Colton Ledbetter, wasn't small enough, we've got Campbell University here for you. Cade Cooler, I believe, I might be pronouncing that wrong, but talk me through what you like about Cooler and why he might be a link to the Dodgers.
Yeah, Cooler. I think either works. But another guy who really fits what the Dodgers have done in the last few years. The selling point here is the fastball. Big carry, induced vertical break. It's going to get a ton of swing and misses. He's a little bit on the smaller side. There's some reliever risk. If this sounds like I'm describing other college pitchers.
Is Clayton Beeter that you're talking about? I'm sorry. Did I miss something here?
Yeah, I mean, you could say Clayton Beeter. Size-wise, I think Emmett Sheehan and Nick Nastrini don't necessarily fit because those are both 6'4", 6'5" guys. But yeah, the fastball profile here is really what the Dodgers look at. And we know that when it comes to pitchers, that is, one of their foundational points that they look at in these drafts. It's a fastball that can get swings and misses in the zone and get guys to chase. Yeah. And if you're talking fastballs, Cade Kuehler has one of the better fastballs in this pitching class. And the Dodgers haven't necessarily been afraid of guys with a little reliever risk as well. If you look historically, this regime, which is now extended back to the 2015 draft, they've been open to taking guys like that.
Yeah. Looking back to last year, and the Dodgers took basically 75% of their picks were all hitters, very few pitchers. It's interesting because you mentioned this is not a strong class for pitchers once you get outside of the first, 15 to 20 picks, that kind of thing. As referenced here, you only have a few on here. So do you see this sort of following a similar trajectory? I'm not saying the Dodgers go into this with, we're going to draft a crap load of hitters this year and next year we're going to draft load pitchers. I think they probably just take the board as it falls. The Dodgers are fortunate enough that their farm system's fine. They're not drafting for need at any level here. But do you see a potential for a repeat of that where there's a ton of hitters and a lot less pitchers this time around again?
Not necessarily. I think, first pitch, second pitch, maybe third pitch is where, if you're asking me to bet, I'd probably lean towards a position player. Okay. But after that, I think it's really a toss-up. And there are a lot of interesting arms, as there are in every draft, both college and high school, once you get down to it. I think just at the top of the draft, once you get past I think like the first four college pitchers that I mentioned, the Noble Meyer, the prep pitcher, there's a little bit of a drop-off, and it might not be as strong of a class. Just in numerosity, there are guys, I mentioned Cade Kuehler, and I have a couple prep pitchers on there, Travis Sikora and Josh Noth. Noth in particular has been a guy who's really risen up draft boards in the last couple months, going from maybe a third or fourth or fifth round guy to someone who could go potentially on day one. And all it takes is one. All it takes is one pitcher. Even if your top 10 guys on the board out of a certain pick, 9 of them are hitters. If the top guy is a pitcher, you probably need to go with the pitcher. So
yeah. And shout out to Noble Meyer, Portland, Oregon resident, local up here. Paul Wilson, another guy who is even closer to where I used to live. A guy that has been mocked in the top 2 to 3 rounds, something we'll see. So before we get to some of the other later in the draft stuff, as I look at this list of 12 guys, you've got Walker Martin, a high school shortstop, third. Your notes say the swinging lefty shortstop is physically reminiscent of another prep shortstop the Dodgers took with their first pick 11 years ago, Corey Seager. He's third on your list if he's anything like Corey Seager. But you mentioned he might not be there because it's all about draftability with him. I'm curious, and maybe it is Martin, maybe it's someone else. Is there someone on this list of 12 that maybe you find yourself to be a lot higher on than some of the consensus boards and mock drafts, that kind of thing?
Martin, so you're probably not going to like this. He's been linked to the Giants as high as pitch 16.
Wow.
So I think there's a decent shot he's not going to be there. If he's there, I think he'd be one of the best players on the board. In terms of higher than consensus, it depends where you look.
Yeah, I know MLB rankings are like all over the place, board to board, because there's so many dudes. And when you're comparing high school player to high school player, it's got to be nearly impossible.
Yeah, I'll go with Bryce Matthews. This is a guy who on some boards is more in second round range, maybe like 50 to 60. In other boards, he's, squarely in first round range. And it seems like there's some interest from teams, either the back half of the first round or this compensation round that the Dodgers are in. And he might end up going in this range. I like him a lot. Really had a big breakout year for Nebraska. 20 homers and power speed combo. A little bit of swing and miss in his game, but I think the tools there are really impressive, and would have no issue with the Dodgers taking him at 36. I think he'd be a great pick there.
Will he be ready to play shortstop in October, do we think?
Let's see. A couple injuries and might need to be.
Yeah, I mean Rojas's weighted runs created plus. I mean, I don't know. We could dig into how hard that would be to replicate. As we talk through the rest of the draft for the Dodgers, one interesting thing to note, and we can kind of get out of here on this, is that the Dodgers do have $7.3 million in their draft pool. Obviously, they can go above that 4.99%. So do the math on that. But that's $3 million more than last season, in part because they lost two guys who they had offered qualifying offers to, Tyler Anderson and Trey Turner. They also didn't sign any qualifying offer guys for the first time in like 3 seasons on their own. So they've got an extra $3 million. You pointed out to me right before we went on, this is the first time in a few years that they have a second round pick plus 2 extra 4th round picks for the Turner and Anderson losses. So when you look at it, just in the top 5 rounds, they've got pick 36, 60, 95, 127, 136, 137, and 163. So 7 picks in the first 5 rounds. The Dodgers, for the first time in a while, have a pretty healthy draft pool. So just big picture, not necessarily thinking about the first pick that the Dodgers make here, but how do you see that impacting? Does that change their draft strategy significantly, do you think? Or is it kind of the same strategy just with more picks involved?
Yeah, I think it just enables them to do more things and be a little more creative. The last couple years they've had their first round pick, and last year their first round pick was dropped 10 spots. Their first round pick was technically a second round pick.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, when you're picking there and then you don't have an actual second round pick, so you're not picking again until maybe like around pick 100 at the end of the 3rd round. That's a big difference. You're missing out on a lot of those guys. You get 1 pick in the top 95 picks.
Yeah.
That's a deficit. And the fact that the Dodgers have been able to do fairly well despite that, I think, is evidence that their ability to scout and develop talent. Emmett Sheehan, 2021 6th round pick to the majors in less than 2 years, exhibit A of that.
Yeah.
It enables them to do a lot more and bring in more talent. I think the 2020 draft at the time, it felt like a pretty big haul. The Dodgers had an extra 2nd round pick that they acquired in that trade from the Twins for Kenta Maeda with Brusdar Graterol. And they used that to take Clayton Beeter, who of course ended up being traded to the Yankees in the Joey Gallo trade. And then the year before that, they had an extra 1st round pick from not signing their 1st round pick the year prior. They used that to take Cody Hosey and Michael Busch. So this is probably going to feel not quite there because they don't have 2 of those really high picks, but just in terms of volume of talent and maybe how creative they're able to get with some of these interesting high school players, they're able to do a little bit more, especially top of day 2 of the draft, rounds 2 through 5, they have more picks than they've had there in the last couple of years.
Well, it sounds like they do better when they don't have multiple firsts, multiple seconds. I mean, Cody Hosey, Clayton Beeter, a couple of guys that were high draft picks that haven't exactly panned out the way that the Dodgers had hoped they would have. So maybe they just need to pick, in the Dalton rushing range here and around pick 36, and maybe that brings the best out of them. Last question for you, because I know you love this question. There have been rumors and stories that probably circulate every year that some major league team is going to go crazy and they're just going to blow through their draft pool and they're going to draft all the most expensive guys, because a lot of times if a guy is viewed as a high school player to be unsignable, too expensive, it might be a top 3 or 4 round talent, but maybe the guy doesn't get drafted till like the 10th or 11th round because there's no chance of him actually getting signed. There's rumors every year that some team might consider taking the approach of just drafting literally the best player available at every single pick and signing all of them above slot, blowing through that $7 million number, spending $20 million or whatever it is on the draft, and then just taking the penalties that are coming because of how good this draft is. Do you think there's any chance whatsoever that a major league team takes the swing? Because the reports are the Yankees are the best set up to do it, but the Dodgers in that article, I believe it was Kylie McDaniel, correct me if I'm wrong, who wrote it. The Dodgers were like 2nd or 3rd on the list of teams that it would make the most sense for them to go for it.
Do I think there's any chance? There's always a slight chance. Especially with Steve Cohen now an MLB owner and probably a little frustrated with where his money has been going to. Always a chance. Do I think it'll happen? No. Would I like it to happen? Yes. And just for context, for those who might not be aware, the way this would work is every team gets a draft pool, and that draft pool is the sum of the assigned draft values of each of their picks in the first 10 rounds. So if your first pick has a $2.5 million value, that's the suggested value for that pick, but you can pay that person $3.5 million, you can pay them $1.5 million, and then you can redistribute that money to other players. If you go over your draft pool up to 5%, like Jeff mentioned earlier, you only get taxed on it. I think it's a 75% tax on the overage. Once you get over 5%, which no team has ever done in the first place, that's when you start to get into draft pick penalties. And essentially, once you get over 15%, I think, above your draft pool is when you lose 2 first-round picks. Your next 2 first-round picks. So the idea is, if you're going to do it, might as well do it big. Might as well just draft all of these guys, usually high school players who, by the time the 4th or 5th or 6th round comes along, their number's too high for a team to meet. Teams have other financial commitments with other players, and they're going to end up going to school and enter the draft again in 2 or 3 years. So the idea would be to just blow through it, spend as much money as possible, probably even more than 20 million, probably upwards of that, and bring in a ton of talent and then lose your next 2 first-round picks. It is a good idea for a team like the Dodgers or the Yankees, a team who doesn't necessarily care about, spending money on player development and, in these amateur markets, a team that is going to be competitive and going to be a winning team. So they're going to be picking at the end of the first round anyways. And if they go over the luxury tax to a certain amount, they might drop that first round. They might drop that first round pick another 10 spots and not even be in the first round, be in the compensation round or early second round. It's a good idea. A team should do it. I feel like it won't happen. I feel like they'll change the rules and, maybe make it hard capped like the other sports and then picks become tradable. I don't think it'll ever happen because I think there would be a lot of pushback from the ownership side of it. And this is something that would certainly need ownership level approval if a GM or a scouting director wanted to go for it.
Yeah.
It is a great strategy for a team and an owner that's willing to take some of the blowback from maybe the other ownership interests around the league.
Yeah, all the other owners are like, hey, nobody break this one rule because it benefits all of us if none of us break it, because then we all save ourselves money and we have this whole thing. To your point, the one owner who does would be the hated owner by everybody else. The flip side is there's the logistical nightmare of trying to sign all of your picks basically simultaneously, because once it gets out that you're going to be the team that's going to go over, now all of a sudden the high school kid you drafted in the 8th round is like, great, add $1 million to whatever number we were just talking about, because you have no negotiating power. There's no number too high because I can always go back to school, whereas you can't recoup this. You're going to be penalized whether you sign me or not. And so the idea that you would try and sign basically all 20 of your players somehow at the exact same time, even your draft strategy would probably become pretty apparent, by the 6th or 7th round. Like, wait, hold on a second. The Dodgers just drafted their 7th guy that was a top 50 prospect who just was a high school kid who dropped, yada, yada, yada. So I always just like thinking about it. I think it would be hilarious. This did happen with the international free agency deal. There was a similar, nobody breaks this rule. And then I believe it was the Yankees who broke it. The irony being their international free agency class totally bombed. And all the guys they spent money on, I don't think they got much of any value for. So all long and short way of saying it could be interesting. There could be drama with Cruz. Does he go to the Pirates or refuse to sign? Does a team like the Dodgers or Mets or Yankees decide to blow through it? These are some of the interesting things to watch once the draft comes up. Justin, any last thoughts on the draft or the Dodgers or anything in particular that you want to touch on before we leave?
I'm going to put this out here, and this is not draft related. I think this is just wild prediction out of left field. I think Nick Frasso at some point is going to be added to the 40-man roster and will be featured or at least tried in a bullpen role. Assuming the bullpen struggles continue, he's got to be added to the 40-man anyways this offseason. The arm talent, if you're talking about you want to throw a guy out there for 1 inning at a time, the stuff is up there. If you were to rank every pitcher in the organization, it's up there. So I think they should do it or at least explore it. Coming back from Tommy John, he's probably going to be on somewhat of an innings limit anyways. Yeah. I don't know when I'll come on next, so that's my take for now.
I love it. Frasso came over in the Mitch White trade. Do you think he would get called up before Landon Knack? Because he's the other guy who Knack is up at AAA, but Knack probably less of a reliever, sort of high-end reliever profile, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's right. I think with where things are trending now, you probably need a starter. If you're adding another reliever, my guess is it would be a guy like Gus Varland, who was taken in the Rule 5 draft by Milwaukee and then returned a couple months later. So he actually has major league experience, even though he's not on the Dodgers 40-man roster. I was kind of surprised that Ryan Brazier was selected over him, because Varland has 3 option years you could use. Brazier you're kind of stuck with him.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Brazier's been good so far. But
yeah, he's been all right. He's been all right. He's like the classic 1 inning, 1 earned run guy. It feels like 2 out of every 3 times he appears. But hey, he pounds the strike zone, throws a lot of strikes, so we'll take that. But there you go. Frasso, an interesting prediction. And hey, we'll see if it plays out. Justin's our prospect guy, so he would know. And again, Frasso coming over in the Mitch White trade. Yet again, the Dodgers fleecing people at the deadline when it comes to
can't keep getting away with it.
Totally. You can check out Justin's stuff at Future Dodgers on social media, futuredodgers.com as well. Tons of great prospect content. Are you going to, I imagine at some point in the next few months, you'll have a prospect ranking update. You usually do a midway through the year kind of a deal, right?
Yeah. I have a rough reorder pending. There's some guys who might graduate. There's some guys who obviously could get traded. There's going to be a number of guys who enter from the draft. Right, the reorder is roughly in place, but yeah, probably.
Anything you want to tease? Anybody at the top that's that moving way up?
If he doesn't graduate first, Emmett Sheehan, although I feel like that's probably an obvious one.
Yeah, fair. All right. Well, Justin, we appreciate you joining us. Check out his stuff again, futuredodgers.com. You can check out dodgerblue.com for the latest. We'll have Justin on at some point recapping the draft once the Dodgers do make some selections. I know with the All-Star Game stuff, it gets a little tricky timing-wise, and we'll be in Las Vegas doing some stuff there. So stay tuned for that. Subscribe here on the YouTube channel. Ring the notification bell as well. That's Justin. I'm Jeff. As always, enjoy the rest of your day. And, of course, go Dodgers.